Hello everyone, and welcome to our Year in Review Regional Roundtable series, brought to you by the Employment Law Alliance, the largest network of labor and employment lawyers from the best law firms around the globe. My name is Nuno Gouveia, partner with Miranda Alliance, Miranda e Associados. The LA Global Employment Law Year in Review series is classically our most popular series of the year, focusing on the most impactful regulations of past year and forecasting what employers can expect in the current year. Today, we are going to be chatting with lawyers from the ELA member jurisdictions in Africa. Joining us today are, from Angola, Adil Cardoso, Managing Associate at Miranda Alliance Fátima Freitas e Associados Law Firm. From Gabon, Asha Duta, Managing Associate at Miranda Alliance Gabinete Guia Law Firm. And, representing Mozambique, João Pires Teixeira, Associate with Miranda Alliance Pimenta e Associados Law Firm. Well, what a great panel for this Year in Review podcast. Thank you all for joining us. How are you today?
Swell, Nuno, thank you for having us.
Hi, Nuno. Thank you for having us.
Hi, Nuno. Thank you for having us.
Welcome, everybody, and Asha as well. Well, I have here a very interesting set of questions to pose you, and I'm going to start with you, Adil. Well, my first question to you all is, what were the most significant legal changes in 2022 that impacted employers in our countries? Have there been any leadership, government changes that have impacted on your jurisdiction, or were you anticipating any in 2023? Adil, please give us your insights on this.
Thank you, Nuno. As for the news in 2022, we have the new introduction of the remote work. It has been also set a new amount for the national minimum wage. And it was also provided a new presidential decree that established the legal framework for the social security measure to encourage the hiring of employee citizens. And we have also produced a presidential decree that established the legal framework for the national qualification system. It was we have a very old law on that, more than 10 years. So it is a news for the 2022. Thank you, Nuno.
Thank you, Adil. So, Asha, I'm going to pass to you now. Well, what are your takes on Gabon on the same question?
So, Nuno, in Gabon, there have been no significant changes per se to the key actors of the Employment Ministry in 2022. There, of course, has been reshuffling across other ministries and administrations. In fact, Gabon appointed a new Prime Minister and VP this week. So we are right in the middle of it. But the Employment Minister has remained the same, as has the Special Labor Inspector assigned to the petroleum sector, which is naturally quite a strategic position here. Having said that, 2023 is going to be a big year for Gabon. Gabon will witness the presidential election, the legislative elections, and the municipal elections during the second half of the year, in succession, actually. So we are 7 to 8 months away from the presidential elections. Now, it remains to be seen if new appointments will be made, but if they are, new administrative practices and protocols will surely emerge. We have seen this happen in the past. For instance, at this stage, the current Labour Ministry has taken a more consensual approach to the adoption of the new Labour Code in 2021 by formally inviting all of the stakeholders to the negotiation table. And that process took many years before it culminated in this new code. And we need to see if a new administration, if appointed, will take the same approach to legislation building. Another quick example would be the approach to redundancy procedures, which has become a bit different in recent years. It is common now for inspectors to not just rely on, say, documents or evidence provided by the employer, but also to meet with different parties, whether it be the employees, the employee representatives, the union, before granting any authorizations. And again, it remains to be seen if a potentially new inspector would take the same approach.
Well, very interesting news from Gabon. I'm going to pass now to further south, to Mozambique. João, what is your take then on Mozambique? What news do you have on the same topics?
Thank you, Nuno. Firstly, let me stress out that there were indeed a few changes with an impact on labor-related matters which are worth noticing. Examples include the update of the national minimum wages for various existing sectors, from agriculture to manufacturing, including construction and financial services. These updates ranged between 3.6 and 7.6 of the previous amounts. Also, the amendment of the regulation governing mechanisms and procedures for employment in foreign nationals, under which the hire of foreign individuals under the short-term work regime may now last up to 120 days per year instead of the previous 90 days, whether consecutive or not. Finally, it's also worth mentioning the launch of e-visa portal, a government website by means of which visas can now be requested online by the applicants, notably the business visa. On the leadership variations topic, there were no government changes back in 2022 in Mozambique. The country will begin a new electoral cycle in 2023 with the holding of municipal elections, followed by general elections in 2024. So, in a nutshell, one can anticipate that these local elections to occur this year will not have a significant impact on employment-related matters.
Very interesting, João, indeed. I'm going to advance now to a very hot topic, which is remote work or hybrid work, let's call it. I'm going to start now, this time with you, Arsha. Well, my question is to the panel is, how is your country tackling hybrid work from home, return to office, and or cross-border remote work, meaning what we call sometimes work from anywhere? Arsha, what is your view on this and whether there are some news in Gabon on this topic?
Well, Nuno, Gabon's new labor code was actually finalized after the COVID lockdown, so it does contain provisions on remote work, which is something new. It allows employees to engage in remote work in agreement with the employer, and also says that it's up to the employees and the employer to sort of hash the conditions out. So these conditions under which remote work will be carried out should be foreseen in collective bargaining agreements or company-wide agreements. The code also allows the employer to impose remote working as the only form of work during a pandemic, for instance. Having said that, my impression, and this is just me, is that COVID did not necessarily lead to a complete shift in the way employees tackle work outside of the office here. Maybe it is because we had, fortunately, a very short complete lockdown. After that, we did have a partial lockdown, a curfew over several months, but displacements to the workplace were something normal. And there was also the possibility of obtaining exemptions for work outside of the mandated hours from the authorities, which meant that work from home did not necessarily become the norm. Now, to be perfectly honest, as of now, Gabon's workplace culture does not accommodate a hybrid or remote work schedule for the majority of employees. A lot of the work is carried out on site. Extractive sectors are the most important sectors in the national economy. And even when it comes to the employees themselves, they may have a stable or not internet connection on their phone, but they're not necessarily able to download large documents or draft long mails once they're home. And by and large, this is still a paper-heavy work culture, which requires logistics that are not always available at home. Having said that, though, there is one exception, which is cross-border remote work. And I have seen a trend emerging as regards local companies, or say new companies, that have their legal representatives stationed abroad to work remotely, not just to save costs, of course, but also because obtaining work permits and resident permits has become quite difficult now that we have local content regulations in place. And it is becoming difficult to always get the authorizations necessary for expatriate workers.
Very big news from Gabon. Many thanks, Arsha. Well, João, starting with you again. Well, what's your views on remote work, hybrid work, cross-border remote work in Mozambique?
The circumstances of last few years have shown the importance of remote work and actually the need to implement more elasticity in relation to working schemes, aiming to make Mozambique's labor scenario more flexible and attractive to investment. There are not yet regulations in force on these matters, aside naturally from COVID-related legislation. Nonetheless, this is actually expected to be addressed in a near future.
So going past lastly to you, Adil, and I know in Angola you are very regulated on remote work and even on the right to disconnect. So tell us in Angola, what are the news on this topic?
We have recently the statutes for remote work, which they have introduced for the first time last passing year, and is now allowing employee to perform remote work after entering a special agreement with the employee, with the employer. In the meantime, it is highlighted that the remote work in Angola does not allow for working outside of Angola. And that's pretty much the main regime from remote work.
In Angola, I believe that we have now a provision on the right to disconnect. So it is indeed one of the few jurisdictions in the world where it is the right to disconnect is expressly regulated in law.
Yes, for Angola, it is probably country where it's more advanced on this field, and is providing specifically for the right for disconnect when providing remote work.
Okay, so well, we all know that in Angola, employees have the right to turn off electronic means of communication and disconnect from work. But this now leads us to our last question, and I'm going to start with you, João, on this last one. My question to the panel is, what are your predictions for 2023? Meaning, I want to know any employment law updates, changes anticipated that will have the biggest or could have the biggest impact on HR. João, tell us then what are your views and predictions for Mozambique?
Well, Nuno, we are actually anticipating new updates and changes to the labor law. As you might be aware of, the global review of the labor law was put on hold back in 2021 due to COVID-19. We know that this much anticipated review is being now resumed, and multiple social partners from various sectors have been preparing their contributions. This said, we take the view that this is actually an excellent opportunity to build on the recent experience relating to the remote work and regulate this regime, as well as to adjust the existing labor law framework to the current global economic setting and seize Mozambique's huge potential.
Okay, many thanks on Mozambique, João. Returning back to Angola, Adil, what are your predictions for 2023?
Thank you, Nuno. Well, we are expectation to have the approval of the new general labor law. It has been discussed for the last 2 years. It was expected to be approved in August before the elections, but at this point is suspended. So we have no further news, but we expecting that there's some developments during this year.
Well, and the new general labor law will for sure have big news. But what you are saying that we have to wait whether or not it will come out.
Yes, no. The project of the new labor law is introducing fixed and limited term contract as the rule. Is also providing for new rules for remote work, and is providing new status for the student employees, and the parental leave is being increased substantially, and it will remove the distinction between the companies according to the size. So a high expectation from the unions, for example, on giving or the issue of this new law.
Very big news potentially coming in the way. Well, in Gabon, Asha, what are your predictions for this year?
Well, I may need to tread with caution, Nuno, because I think I predicted that 2020 would be the best year ever. So I don't make predictions anymore after that. But I mean, more seriously, I think that the first development that we are anticipating is obviously the adoption of implementing regulations to the labor code. It was adopted in 2021. We are still using the old decrees and orders which were issued under the previous code. And we are waiting for them either to be updated or for new ones to be adopted by either the Council of Ministers. I mean, we will see the way that things go in that regard. And also in terms of trends, I think that Gabonese legislation, not just labor legislation, but legislation in general, is being amended to include provisions on gender equality and the prohibition of discrimination. Very recently, the Civil Code of Gabon amended some articles on consent to marriage, the organization of the family unit, and as did the Penal Code of Gabon that reinforced penalties. This has now been reflected in the new labor legislation. So we have fairly stringent provisions on harassment and bullying in the workplace, discrimination against workers with disabilities or underlying health conditions. And I do think that in 2023, we are going to see quite an increase in claims against management or the employer for such alleged behavior. I think we are seeing this trend emerge already in initial complaints filed by employees before the labor inspector in Gabon, and some cases are actually in court. And I think that will likely increase. And another important development is obviously the establishment of local content policies across different sectors. I'll just take the example of the petroleum sector because it's where we have the most amount of regulations. So the 2019 petroleum law requires petroleum companies to hire Gabonese workers as a preference, improve their skill set, and also encourage local companies held by Gabonese nationals, headed by them, and employing Gabonese nationals. There have been incentives which have been set forth in the law for petroleum companies that resort to local workers and companies. And there are also preference provisions in the law. For instance, subcontracts should be awarded in priority to companies of which at least 80% of the workforce is composed of Gabonese nationals. These are general principles, and implementing regulations such as a decree on local content has already been adopted in the petroleum sector. So this trend, I think, will continue across different sectors. There are other sectors, for instance, the mining sector and the forestry sector, that are also adopting such local content decrees. They are currently under discussion. And another trend that we see is that it's quite difficult now to obtain a work permit, as I was saying earlier, because the authorities are really looking in depth into positions to ascertain if the human resources are available in the Gabonese labor market. So we see a lot more refusals, and it will be more and more difficult, I think, to bring in expatriate workers into Gabon if those positions can be held by nationals, Nuno.
Well, João, Adil, and Ash, many thanks for the session. It has been tremendously helpful and insightful. And thank you all for being available. I hope that you have enjoyed this session.
Thank you, Nuno. It was a pleasure to join you.
We did. Thank you for having
Nuno.
us.
Okay, it has been great. So many thanks to all. This is all the time that we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that this has been as insightful for you as it has been for me. If you would like to connect with Adil, Ash, or João, please click on their bios in the description of this podcast. We also encourage you to reach out to any of our lawyers around the world by selecting Find a Lawyer on the ELA website at ela.law. Information about all of the programs available in 2023 e-Renew series can be accessed in the notes of this podcast. You'll be listening to the e-Renew Regional Roundtable, a series brought to you by the Employment Law Alliance, the world's largest network of labor and employment lawyers from best law firms around the globe. I'm Nuno Gouveia. Thanks for listening.